So let's take stock of where we are. So far, we've considered the substantive crime of conspiracy, what is required to prove it, and the different shapes it might take. Now I want to turn our attention to the most important impact and tool for the prosecution if a conspiracy is proven, that a co-conspirator may be liable for additional crimes that were committed by his partners. The rule and its scope comes out of a landmark United States Supreme Court decision called Pinkerton versus United States. Here, Walter and Daniel were indicted on 1 count of conspiracy and on 9 separate counts of income tax evasion, all stemming from moonshining activities. It was, after all, the 1930s when this took place, and it was illegal to make liquor. Here they were charged with income tax evasion from the sale of that liquor. Notice here that there's only 1 conspiracy count. Even if there are many substantive offenses that flow out of this agreement, in effect there was alleged to be only 1 partnership, 1 meeting of the minds, and a host of crimes that the partnership was supposed to have committed. So here the prosecution is alleging that both brothers should be guilty of all the crimes that followed from their agreement, even though Walter was the only brother committing them. Daniel was what we're going to call a non-perpetrator of these crimes. He didn't actually commit them. How come, you might ask? Aha, here's the rub. Daniel was in prison when Walter committed the crimes. So where's Daniel's participation in income tax evasion if he wasn't even there to commit it? That was Daniel's argument, and it makes sense. He says, I can't be responsible for crimes that I never committed, never aided. After all, did I mention that I was in prison? Here's how important the crime of conspiracy is. The United States Supreme Court held that Daniel was liable for those crimes of Walter by virtue of their partnership, because of their agreement. Daniel was going to be liable for these crimes that his partners committed. Now, there are limits on this doctrine, but the reach is pretty extensive. We're going to call the rule that follows this case the Pinkerton Doctrine. And here is what the court said. It says that if a conspiracy has been proven already, all co-conspirators will be liable for future substantive offenses if those crimes were committed either 1, in furtherance of the conspiracy, or 2, within the scope of the conspiracy, or 3, are reasonably foreseeable from the conspiracy's objective. I suspect the justices had in mind distinctions among these 3 categories, but I'm not sure it really matters. The analysis will drive you to the same place in the end. Co-conspirators will be responsible for those crimes even though they didn't commit them. However, if we're going to try to interpret them, here's how it might look. In furtherance of a conspiracy might be those crimes that are committed to advance the criminal objective, although not specifically identified. In the scope of the conspiracy might be those crimes that were specifically contemplated and intended when the agreement was made. And the term reasonably foreseeable crimes refers to those crimes that would naturally flow from carrying out the target offense. If the crime committed in the future falls into one of these 3 categories, defendant's going to be responsible for that crime even if he never participated in it. The one exception the court noted would be if defendant evidenced an affirmative action to withdraw from the partnership. If defendant has withdrawn, he won't be responsible for crimes that occur after his withdrawal. But, and here's the hook, he's still going to be responsible for the crimes that were committed before he left the partnership. Oh, and yeah, his withdrawing, he's still liable for the crime of conspiracy itself. That's a done deal. The conspiracy doesn't go off the table just because D wants out of that partnership after it's in full swing. The only way withdrawing can relieve defendant of liability for the actual crime, separate crime of conspiracy itself, is if he withdraws before the overt act was committed. Then he might be off the hook for the conspiracy. Otherwise, he's going to be guilty of conspiracy and any crimes he committed before he withdraws. The beauty of the Pinkerton Doctrine is that it makes the co-conspirator bear the risk of association. You join up as partners, you're going to be responsible for those crimes your partner committed. As long as the crime that comes out is in furtherance of the conspiracy, or within the scope of the conspiracy, or reasonably foreseeable from the conspiracy, defendant is going to be responsible. And I keep repeating, even if he is a non-perpetrator of that specific crime. It really turns on its head the notion that every crime requires an actus reus and a mens rea by each participant. Remember, though, in order to invoke the Pinkerton doctrine, you first have to find, through independent analysis, that a conspiracy existed. Pinkerton doctrine never helps prove a conspiracy. Its value only comes into play after a conspiracy has been found, and then we can determine future liability for future crimes.